You guys ever notice whenever you search up John Doyle's name on YouTube, all you get are like a bunch of bread tubers, right? All these like left-wing bread tubers doing like a gazillion reaction videos, and it's like, oh, John Doyle dumb, John Doyle this, John Doyle that. And I'm like, you know what? Okay, it's time to do a friend a favor. Okay, we need right-wing bread tubers. We need counter bread tubers to rally against the cringe and make videos in support of John Doyle. And so that's exactly what we're gonna do here, folks. Okay, and as you read in the title, today's video is actually not from actual Jake or Vosh, although we could do that, although we should do that at some point. It's actually from the Ayn Rand Center in UK. This is a libertarian anti-John Doyle bread tube style video done by the Ayn Rand Center in the United Kingdom. And so that's what we're going to be reacting to tonight. So let's get straight into this. This is going to be fun. Yeah. I've not watched this whole video yet, by the way, but this is going to be fun. We will experience this together, folks.
Religion in and of itself is inherent.
And by the way, if you are finding this from searching John Doyle on the replay or whatever, you're finding this from searching John Doyle's name, you're a fan of John Doyle, hey, subscribe to this channel. And if you're watching on the live stream right now, be sure to leave a like. But seriously, subscribe to this channel as well. Sources say, well-verified sources say that John Doyle, who is a friend of mine, actually, as a matter of fact, I am John Doyle's favorite person, potentially in the whole world, okay? And he doesn't act like it. Whenever like we see each other, he always just like is like, hey, okay. But we know deep down, Vincedao literally is John Doyle's favorite person, and this is a fact. So if you're a Doyle head, if you're from the HOC community, be sure to subscribe to this channel as well. Okay, very epic. Wanted to say that really quick, but
apparently totalitarian because it's saying these are the most
all right,
important
let's
values.
rewind here.
Religion in and of itself is inherently totalitarian because it's saying these are the most important.
So that's what we're starting off with already, folks. You see where this is gonna go. Did you hear what he just said? Let me replay that in case people didn't get that, because I know it's like the very beginning. But
religion in and of itself is inherently totalitarian because it's
yes it is okay, yes, that's right. Christianity and religion in general, but we're really talking about Christianity is inherently totalitarian. That is true. That is absolutely true. Okay, Jesus Christ is my king. All right, there's no in between, there's no nuance, there's no degree of like, well, I don't know if I agree with Jesus on that, shouldn't we like ration? No. Okay, listen, and the fact of the matter is, libertarians, I'm sorry, but you know, at a certain point, Jesus Christ is going to return. He's going to have a 1,000-year reign here on earth, and there's not going to be any of this. Well, I don't think you're violating my NAP, King Jesus. Yeah, it's not going to work like that. When the end times comes, it's not going to work like that. You're not going to have a say in the creation of new heaven or new earth. You're not going to be able to decide, well, I don't really want God to do that. It's going to violate my property rights. Yeah. Cope and seethe harder. It is totalitarian. I am a slave to Christ, okay? Christ is my king. It is so true. It's so true. They say that as if it's an own. You know, I could go on the line of saying that, like, well, actually, religion is true liberation. In Christ, we find true liberation. In Christ, we find true freedom. We're told that in Galatians, and that is true. But at the same time, there is a degree of totality to it. It's actually very true, right? Because God's authority is final. God's word is final. You know, there's no degree of like liberty. There's no degree of nuance or rationality to the whole thing. Okay, there is none of that. There is none. Okay, and so, you know, libertarians, I know you guys have a very hard time accepting authority, and I understand that. But I'll just say, you know, God's authority is maybe the one authority you do want to accept. Okay, so it's very true. It's very true. You actually, I mean, he's right, just not in the way he thinks he's right. Okay, it's so true. Yes, let's get a Christ and King in the chat. Spam it. It's very. Let's go.
Saying these are the most important values, and you can't question them. They're to be accepted as dogma on faith.
So true. That is correct. That is so correct. Okay. You're right. This is dogma. This is dogma, not to be questioned. Okay, we take it word for word. Very true. He's agreeing with me, you guys. No, seriously. In all.
Recently, John Doyle uploaded a video explicitly attacking capitalism and individualism. My colleague and I sat with a communications expert known as Don Watkins to see if there was.
Do you guys remember this guy? I don't know take a sip of coffee. I don't know how many people remember this guy, but I remember this guy from like TikTok in 2020. I think his username was like Cudwy or something. He had some like weird username, but this guy used to be like the epitome of pseudo-intellectual libertarianism on TikTok. His whole brand was like talking really fast and using really big words. You know, he would make all these like responsive videos, debunk videos to people. He was like, I mean, it was just very cringe overall, if I'm being honest. Like, well, you know, capitalism is not. And he would like talk very fast and like, you know, try to like own you that way. Talk so fast you can't even understand him, and it's like, oh, I'm talking fast and I'm using bigger words and you can't even follow my logic. That means I'm right, you're wrong. I can talk circles around you. But in reality, very often he was saying nothing. And I know for a fact he was also a big time debate me, bro. So I know for a fact if he finds this video, if they find this video, they're going to be like, bro, debate me. You're so wrong. Oh, yeah, you think we're so wrong? Well, come debate me. And the answer is no. Okay. No, I'm not debating. I'm not debating these people. These people are a waste of time to debate. It's very true. Okay. And the simple fact of the matter is I'm right and you're wrong. It's so true. We got to prove our ideas, bro. We got to prove. No. Nope. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. I'm right. You're wrong. And this is objectively true. This is objectively verifiable. So deal with it. Deal with it. But I don't know if people remember this guy, but that he used to do that. I recall that.
To what John Doyle was saying. Stay tuned.
First place? Well, because as the ANCAP will happily tell you, businesses have an incentive to maximize market share and profits, all that good stuff. And the logical consequence of a corporation gaining enough wealth and market share to where it's more powerful than the state is simply for it to weaponize the state by buying it so as to maintain that position of wealth and power. This is exactly what's happening now. So what's the solution? Well, just go back to the free market so it can happen again. Like, how are you even going to do that in the first place when now the elites own your government? You're not.
Well, it's actually
very true. Very, very 100% correct take, right? And that's not even really an anti-capitalist take necessarily. And the video is titled "Conservative John Doyle Hates Capitalism." Oh no, he hates the OnlyFans economy. Cancel the guy, seriously. But that's not even, I don't even know if that's necessarily a super like anti-capitalist take. The only take there is basically that, yes, the government is incredibly corrupt, you know, but there's also a sense that corporations buy the government and vice versa. And it's just like, that's the reality of the country. Yeah, you're right. He's right. But I don't know. Let's see what the Lolbert response is to this. Okay.
the complete opposite. It's when the government interferes with capitalism and starts controlling who can.
Oh no! Ow! I got to cramp my side. Oh really? So like when corporations like lobby the government, when corporations buy power within the government, that's not, you know, corporations buying power within the government. That's not corporations lobbying. No, actually, as a matter of fact, it's the other way around. That's government interfering in the market. It's like, what are you talking about? John is absolutely right. It's like, okay, you as a libertarian philosopher or whatever may respect these sort of free market principles that the corporations are not supposed to interact with the government in that way. Corporations should not try to buy power, buy influence. Like, okay, maybe you believe that. Maybe if it was your company, you wouldn't do that. But actually, as a matter of fact, even like corporations, even like your average business fat cat, your average businessman doesn't follow that either, right? He doesn't follow the market in that sense. He's simply going to do what is best for his company. And especially with big companies, but companies in general, having power, having influence within the government, you know, is going to benefit your business, right? And so assuming it's not outlawed, assuming there's nothing done about it, naturally, inherently, business owners are going to do that. Like, but no, actually, you know, when Amazon buys power within the government, when corporations buy out, you know, powerful politicians, that's not corporations buying out politicians. That's actually the government touching the corporations. The corporations can do no wrong, as we know. OnlyFans can do absolutely no wrong. You have to show for Amazon day in and day night. Wonderful stuff. We're 57 seconds in. Wonderful stuff so far.
What kind of businesses can get started when it starts subsidizing favored businesses? Well, then there's a really good, and then there's a really powerful incentive to use your money to, quote, buy the government and buy influence from the government. But the problem is that that's not what capitalism is. Capitalism is when the government defines rights, it defines your freedom, and says, like, don't commit crimes, and here's what property rights are, and then you are able to go out there and achieve something. And at that point, to the extent that the government actually means,
you know, it's very funny. these types of people very often say, like, make fun of socialists for saying that's not real socialism, or communists for saying that's not real communism. But do you ever notice that when it comes to like hard right libertarians, like the Ayn Randist people, as a matter of fact, they basically do the same thing. Basically every single application of like market economies, well, that's not real capitalism, because there was like the natural human tendency, right? It's in like any society, realistically, there's going to be some degree of government moneying, messing around with business messing around with government. Like that's just natural, right? That's just kind of how any society is going to work inherently. But it's like, they'll come to this and say, well, that's not real this is not real capitalism. It's like, dude, there is no country on earth, like in human history, okay, in the same way. Dude, don't I sound like I'm trying to own a socialist right now? But I'm not. I'm trying to own a capitalist, quote unquote. There's no country in human history that has had a totally separate and like a total recognition only of the minarchist view of property rights or whatever. Like that's just never happened. There's always some degree of like regulation on one side or the other, or corporations buying power in the government. And largely speaking, right, this is also partially just because of human nature, right? Both sides, powerful politicians and powerful businessmen equally will want to do things that further them, and inherently there's going to be a crossover between like the economy and the government. But of course, what do we get is just like, that's not real capitalism, bro. Do you notice that? Am I the only one who's noticing this? It's like, it's the same exact thing as that's not real socialism people. When it's just like tried time and time and again, it doesn't work out that way. Same thing with this. That's not real capitalism people. It's like, dude, just recognize that, this is how the system does work. And let's just work practically outside of abstract radical ideology or super complex ideology, whatever. Let's just work practically to fix the system, Edmund Burke actually warned, okay, Edmund Burke, the ideological founding father of conservatism, not Ayn Rand, not some like Milton Friedman, not some like libertarian thinker, but Edmund Burke, of course, our guy, right? Our sort of ideological, guy, right? The guy we sort of follow most besides Jesus, the guy we kind of follow, I guess you could say, the most for sort of the basis of what we believe. His texts were very influential within the conservative mind, conservative thought. He warned of like these abstract complex ideologies. He connotated them with the left-wing radicals, right, with the French revolutionaries, and you're really saying the same thing here, I guess you could say, on the other side. I think in many ways Objectivism, sort of Ayn Rand's line of thinking, all of these sort of forms of libertarianism are at their core forms of liberalism. But we'll talk about that in a second. Let's continue watching this.
Maintains that functioning is just protecting people's rights from being violated by the initiation of physical force, then there's nothing to buy. And it was only the fact that even in the freest eras, government always engaged in this kind of control of business that always left the road open and incentivize people to try to buy influence. That it's precisely because capitalism was not respected that whole phenomenon gets off the ground. It's just not.
Here you go. What did I say? Right? It's really the same type of thing. It's just like, well, that wasn't real capitalism, bro. It's like, okay, dude. Again, these kind of like the same thing as like socialists, right? You're thinking in a utopia. You're not living in the same thing here. Okay, same thing here. John Doyle is approaching this practically, right? He just understands how the world works, understands how the economy works, understands naturally how governments and businesses, as this guy admits, will always interact. He's the one really providing a real world concrete solution, or at least kind of a concrete diagnosis of the problem. It's this guy who's basically getting out here and whining that his market principles that like nobody has ever respected in human history and really come from nowhere, quite frankly, they just weren't respected, bro. And that's the reason why. It's like here's a guy just sitting here just like crying that like my abstract principles weren't respected, and meanwhile Doyle is coming out and saying just like, look, this is the way it is, let's work within that. Who would you trust to fix the country? This guy with a gigantic beard, or the guy with the well-kept beard in John Doyle. That's actually a good metaphor. It's actually a good metaphor for the way they think. It's true. This guy, he has like he has the La La Land beard going on. You can tell he has a pretty big imagination going on here. John Doyle is the pragmatist. John Doyle is the guy who thinks in reality. It's true.
Historically or logically true that capitalism unleashes this kind of attempt to quote by the government.
Aren't you just changing definitions? Your definition just tries to, magically fix everything, and you're trying to paint some utopia by just changing the definition of the word capitalism, ignoring what people are actually talking about.
Well, it's actually this guy who's really engaging in a definition switch, which is the idea of power. Well, what kind of power are we talking about? Because there's two kinds of power that are radically at odds. So one is the power of production, economic power. And that is the idea that like, well, hey, I have wealth. I can do more things than I could if I had less wealth. And they're conflating that with the power of the gun. Political power, the power to use physical force to dictate what others do. So no matter how much economic
wealth does buy that kind of power, though. It's like, again, and people like, I always, it's almost kind of obnoxious sometimes to even listen to like these types of discussions, because they present arguments that like I have heard a million times. I used to even believe myself for like a significant period of time. And I think, that's probably the case with most conservatives. Like we've heard kind of the basic spiel here, but they try to kind of come to you and they think they're like very, very smart for saying it, right? You kind of got this vibe. Remember that Austin Peterson debate we reacted to, John Doyle and Austin Peterson? Same kind of thing, right? You can kind of tell they really, really think that they're bringing something revolutionary here to the table by saying this when they're not. But it's like, I mean, yeah, I know what these people believe. So let me just say, like, I don't want to hear any, well, NAP, you just don't understand. I understand what you believe. What I am saying is that what you believe just is not the state of reality. It's not the state of the world. It's not the state of things. I mean, the truth of the situation is that not just in a wannabe capitalist economy, just in any society, any collection of humans in general, wealth does buy that kind of power, right? Wealth ultimately can and does buy more force, okay? Especially in like a representative form of government. I mean, what do you expect to happen? I mean, I don't know like what their stance is on something like a Republican or Democratic form of government, but arguably in any type of like Lockean constitutional form of government, I mean, I think direct democracy is worse, but in any form of democratic system, those with wealth actually, as a matter of fact, will be able to influence things even more, because with wealth, they can buy narratives, right? They can buy mass media. They have the buying power. They have the money to influence elections, right? Not just in like cheating ways necessarily, just in the ways of like, media, right? Disseminating narratives, disseminating like cultural and political ideas. But that's just the way, like, when has it not been the case? Even like outside of any democratic system, just in general, when has it not been the case in like any society in human history where monetary wealth doesn't also buy political and forceful power? Like, that's just how it works, I know what he's going to say. Well, but that's not the way I believe it should work, because, I believe that in the end, non-aggression principle, it's like, dude, I know what you believe, but nobody else in society respects or ever will respect that. So you can't really just keep using this as an excuse. It's like it's a self-defeating prophecy in many ways, but
power you have in a free society, all you can do is offer other people rewards. Hey, work with me, buy from me, let me advertise with you. You can offer people opportunities and they're free to go their own way.
You can do that in the but people will never do that in the government. People will never go to politicians and say, hey, do this for me, buy slash sell this for me. It's like, does that just not happen with the government? I know you don't believe it's supposed to happen with the government, but it just does happen with the government, as with anything else, right? Because it is just simply the goal of a business to maximize profits, and so businesses will do that, and at least the very successful ones, and that's the reason why they're successful, precisely because businesses will do that basically to any means necessary. And in a society with the government, very often that means influencing the government. I don't understand. I don't know
what political power under capitalism is used for. It's only to stop.
Is there bad audio? Okay, hold on. If there's echo, I'll just put in an AirPod and hopefully that's better. Let's see. Let me see if I can pick this up. Give me a second. All right, let's try it now. All right, let me know if there's an echo now, guys.
People who engage in the initiation of physical force, to stop criminals, to stop foreign threats, to enforce contracts. And what the critics are doing is saying, no, I want a system where political power is used for whatever I want it to be used for. And that's the real threat. That's the thing that actually takes away our freedom and controls us. But that's the complete opposite of capitalism.
But the truth is that there's no such thing as the individual, which is a liberal idea, by the way. But that doesn't mean that you don't have
So
individual
true.
rights. Of course you do.
So true.
That doesn't mean that you can't live your life as you please. Of course you can. But from the moment that you are born, you are defined not as an individual, but as a son or as a daughter, and then maybe a brother or a sister, an American, a mentor, whatever. At no point do you ever exist as an individual. No man is an island. You're really not that special because you rely on other people and people rely on you. And it's that interdependence and cohesion upheld through a common culture that is the foundation of a prosperous and flourishing society.
I mean, this is
There's another Burkean idea. Actually, I gave a speech earlier today, a Zoom speech for a high school chapter, and this is something I talked about. But, you know, conservatism, conservatism, I put in parentheses, quote unquote, nowadays has this idea in their minds that, you know, like John talks about, basically everything is about the individual. Society and our approach to politics ought to be centered around the individual. But again, reverting back to Edmund Burke, reverting back to true conservative philosophy, right? We know that Edmund Burke did not view society as like a just disconnected, discombobulated group of random individuals with all these just like natural rights, just going about their day and like living in the NAP to one another. Edmund Burke believes society to be connected by a moral bond, okay? A moral bond between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. You can kind of think of this like a triangle or a trinity, right? But it is based on this interconnectedness that strong, you know, that's first of all, it's based off this interconnectedness that, you know, conservative philosophy is formed. So let's just be clear about that. But it is also based on this interconnectedness that any society grows prosperous, grows successful. And that's very true. And really that kind of brings up, so I guess I'll talk about it. The reason why I argue, and many people argue, that libertarianism and objectivism and whatever else are simply forms of liberalism, arguably even leftism, but let's just say liberalism, is precisely because of the fact that they reject, I guess, what you could call the conservative trinity or whatever you want to say it, right? They are fundamentally centered around purely the individual, right? The liberation of the individual without, you know, the conservative traditional view is that we are born with a natural bond to our countrymen, to the people around us, to our families, to the hierarchies around us. And we our sort of duty in life is one of self-sacrifice, right? That is kind of the view of the traditional male, the conservative mind, right? We live and by the way, the Christian mind as well. Let's be clear about that. But we live our lives basically in self-sacrifice to others, to the society around us, right? And libertarianism is premised on the opposite. Okay, actually, someone in my Telegram channel dropped an Ayn Rand quote earlier today that was extremely relevant to this. Yeah, this is from Ayn Rand's book titled "The Virtue of Selfishness." Okay, so you know. Does that sound like anything that Burke talked about or whatever? No, right? But in a book Ayn Rand wrote called "The Virtue of Selfishness," she writes, and this is kind of like an ideological premise for, you know, libertarian thought. The basic social principle of the objectivist ethics is that just as life is an end in itself, so every living human being is an end in himself, right? Not the means to the ends, to the ends or the welfare of others, and therefore, man must live for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others nor sacrificing others to himself. To live for his own sake means that the achievement of his own happiness, the achievement of his own happiness is man's highest moral purpose. Okay, now let's take ideology out of this for a second. You heard what he said. You heard what she said, sorry. And we know that her book is titled "The Virtue of Selfishness." Let's think like we're fourth graders for a second. I mean, I think sometimes you need this in politics. You know, all like kind of abstract concepts aside, does that sound wise? Does a society where, as she literally writes, everyone ought to be selfish, make no sacrifice for others, live only for their own sakes, does that sound like a society that's going to prosper or succeed to you? Like, okay, think like a fourth grader. Don't really overcomplicate this. It's not that hard to understand. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is asinine, you know. But That's what libertarian thought, and that's also what liberal thought is based on too. They reach different economic conclusions and whatnot, but ultimately, I would argue the end goal of what they really believe and what their fundamental view of human nature is basically, they are basically one and the same, right? So
This is a complete straw man. To be an individual, it's basically you would have to be God. You would have to come out with no parents, have no relationships, no interaction with other human beings. Then you're an individual. And since that doesn't exist, no, you're just a piece of the collective. But that is a completely,
you are.
You can't define a
Yes,
term
you
in
are.
terms of some phony, non-existent reality. Individualism
really?
is the idea that each person is an end in him or herself. That means that
Hey. I just quoted the Ayn Rand book, and he said it too. I haven't watched this far in the video, by the way, so that's just pure coincidence. But that is quite funny.
your life belongs to you. You have the right to enjoy it, and it has both a metaphysical and moral component. So the metaphysical component is that to be alive is to be an individual creature that has control over your faculties. And for a human being, that means primarily control over your own mind. That is, to be an individual, individualism is rooted in the fact that to understand things, to set goals, to set values, to achieve knowledge, all of that has to be is the work of an individual choosing to use his mind, make choices about how to live his or her own life. And clearly that's something we do by ourselves and can only do by ourselves. And then morally, it's the idea of, yeah, we have relationships, but what is the nature of those relationships? Is it that the group owns me and it gets to use me however it chooses? Is it the idea that basically sometimes I'm a resource to be exploited by the group and sometimes I get to do the exploiting? Or is it that, no, we're each individuals, we're
correct.
each an end in ourselves, and we deal with each other through voluntary choice to mutual benefit? Anybody who's denying individualism, what they're trying to do is say, like, no, I want to run other people's lives, and I want to
yes, I do.
Other
Yes, I
people's
do.
effort.
Correct.
And that is, I mean, that is
I know it's too well,
kind of
guys.
slavery embodied by the ideal of collectivism.
So I think that kind of understanding of individualism.
Well, you know what individualism really is? Okay, in many ways, it is self-worship, I would argue. But I don't know. We'll just keep watching here. Okay, I don't want to keep stopping every 2 minutes, but let's keep watching.
The kind of slavery embodied by the ideal of collectivism.
So I think that kind of understanding of individualism is, untrue. Like the idea that you take actions to serve yourself doesn't exist, like in a family, for instance. Like you have a duty to, take care of your sister or your brother, or you might have to take out the trash and wash dishes and so on and so forth. So it's not that you're taking actions as a means to yourself, it's that you're taking actions as means to someone else's end.
What will often be equated.
Actually, I think that's supposed to be is that supposed to be a question to, because what he said is basically correct, but I don't know if that's supposed to be a question to him, like, are you saying this, or is it supposed to be like a statement? I'm not even sure. Now I'm kind of confused, but let's just keep watching.
Equated is like family and collectivism. And then the idea is just, well, all of society is just an extended family. But
correct.
That's BS.
Correct. Yes, it is. Yeah, that is literally correct. It is literally the case. Okay. To quote Tucker Carlson in a very famous debate with another individual, yes. Okay. Maybe if we started viewing our country like a family, things would get a little bit better, would they not? No, literally, yes. And as we talked about, right? What did Edmund Burke define society really as, right? No, if not a moral bond between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born, right? As someone who is, these people are not conservative. I don't even think these people claim to be conservative, but I know there is really this kind of divide over whether or not to embrace these types of ideas within the conservative movement. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you guys have ever been to like a TPUSA conference or even I think CPAC or something like that, but very often you will notice the Ayn Rand Institute. I think this is the Ayn Rand Center, but the Ayn Rand Institute literally, tabling at this stuff and kind of advertising to this stuff. I think they try to, brand themselves, at least kind of work with conservatives. And I think conservatives ought to understand, we are people who claim to be sort of patriots or nationalists. Why? The reason why, okay, is literally because we view society like, even if you don't really understand why you're patriotic, why you love your fellow countrymen, why you feel a duty to your fellow countrymen so much, why you're such a patriot, okay, most fundamentally, it is because you view society as somewhat of an extended family, right? You view society as being a moral bond between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born, right? You view yourself as having some type of like connection to that society, moral connection, spiritual connection. And, understand that when you kind of go down this rabbit hole of like, I basically have no duty or to society or whatever, there's a reason why libertarians, I think Ayn Rand, this and whatnot, and most libertarians support open borders. They're not really big fans of, nation states or borders or anything like that. Okay. And understand it really boils down to this, right? They don't really view society, a country, a nation as really being anything all that important and significant. Just like the communists, just like the socialists, they view borders as being this just basically arbitrary divide between like random people that really doesn't mean anything, As conservatives, we are the ones who believe in the nation state, right? We believe we are patriots, and in order to be patriots, you have to, have some degree of a belief that you live in a country that matters, in a country where people have connection to each other. Or else, what are you even patriotic of? Are you patriotic of the military-industrial complex? Are you patriotic of like, I don't know, the Koch brothers? I mean, some Republicans actually are, but I don't think that's how most average conservatives really see it. So just a reminder, and just kind of another reason as a conservative not to allow these types of ideas into the tent, okay? It is my opinion that the Ayn Rand Institute should not be within 500 feet of any conservative conference. I don't think... I know they're allowed in and stuff, and I'm not, I guess they buy a table or whatever like anyone else, but really I don't think Ayn Rand, Objectivism, these people have any place within the same tent as us. They have their own thing. They're not one of us. They shouldn't caucus with us. They shouldn't be one of us. And as a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say that conservatives really ought to view Ayn Rand on the same kind of moral level as they do any socialist or communist philosopher. Okay, and I mean that. I really do mean that. Ayn Rand should have, number one, no credibility within the conservative movement. There should not be any self-proclaimed conservative or anyone in these circles ever quoting Ayn Rand for any reason unless you're using it against her. But I would say, even on top of that, I don't even think she should just not have credibility. I think she should be vilified. Ayn Rand ought to be vilified in the same way we do, all these like left-wing thinkers, the way we do Trotsky, Karl Marx, or whatever. I'm not saying she directly killed people or anything, but it is to say that we ought to really like view her ideas, which are fundamentally liberal and are fundamentally anti-Christian and heretical and anti-conservative on like every single level. We ought to view them through the same brush as we do hard leftism, because like I said, ultimately, whether it's socialism or objectivism, both, they may get there differently. I would say both ultimately lead you towards the same end destination, the same end result, both on Earth, and let's also mention in the next life as well. Okay. And I think that's very true. So, I don't think there's a place for Ayn Rand in this tent. I don't think conservatives should be debating her ideas. I don't think you should I don't even think it should be much of a discussion. But it is a discussion, and so we have to work around that. And I think a lot of people went through their Ayn Rand phase. I never really went through a specifically Ayn Rand phase. I think I did go through a libertarian phase. I was more into like Ron Paul and like Rand Paul and stuff like that, and some like Milton Friedman. I never really got into Ayn Rand, which I'm thankful for, which is very good. But I don't think no place in the movement again.
Collectivism is that we're going to use physical force to sacrifice the individual to the group. A family is a collection of individuals, and when individuals are bound...
So is a society. A family is a collection of individuals. What do you think a society is? Really? Is a society not a collection of individuals? Okay, anyways.
Bound by relationships where they value each other.
Are we not supposed to be bound by are we not bound by relationships to fellow Americans in which we value each other? To an extent, he's right. yes, in modern America, that's not really the case, is it? Right? We are so disconnected. We're so like disunited as a country, and in many ways, it's on purpose. That you're right. You're right. It's not like that, right? We're not. We don't feel that proper connection, I guess, that Americans historically did, or at least ideally did. But then, what's the health of society? Yes, because he's really right to an extent. We're at a time in American history where our society is like as disconnected and as divided and as sort of like, just all over the place, discombobulated as ever. And he's right. Nowadays in America, people don't really feel that paternalistic connection to one another. They don't feel that bond to one another. They don't really share anything in common. They don't share common goals in common. So my question is, why is it not a libertarian paradise? Why is it not? Why are we not doing fantastic in America right now? If because listen, we view ourselves, we view each other like family members, probably less than we ever have. Okay. Why are things not, rosy right now? Why is this not the paradise city where the grass is green and the girls are pretty? Okay. The grass is dying and the girls have OnlyFans and a bunch of piercings and tattoos. Like this is just, it's not going great, buddy. It's really not, I don't know. I don't feel happy. And yes, it's true. In this society, everyone really does worship themselves like Ayn Rand did, and Ayn Rand wanted everyone else to. I don't think people are really that happy. I think people are actually using opioids and killing themselves in record numbers, okay, and experiencing mental health problems and disorders in record numbers. I don't feel the happiness, bro. I don't feel the self-liberation that much, bro. So
then there's a kind of reciprocity that goes into maintaining our existence as members of a family. Now, it's complicated when you talk about kids because they're not fully developed adults. They can't decide on what kind of relationships they want to enter into yet. They're kind of under, it's the parent's job to be making a lot of those decisions for them, certainly early on. And so that's not really the model of human relationships. If you're thinking about like, how should we think about relationships with adults in society? You don't start with what's the relationship between parents and kids, but to compare that to individuals.
Yeah, how about the relationship of a church, huh? How about that? How about that? But no, I mean, what does hierarchy magically disappear once you turn 18? That does seem to be their belief, which is a really weird belief. It's like, oh, the second someone turns 18, they have the full agency to like totally control their own lives. Is that how like things work? Because once you turn 18, it's like, yeah, technically you don't have to obey your parents. In many ways, you still kind of do, depending on your life situation. But there are still absolutely hierarchies out there to be obeyed. Whether you're a student, a college student now that you're 18, and you have to listen to professors and university officials and whatnot. If you're a college student, I don't know, in like a fraternity or whatever, right? There's a hierarchy there. If you go out into the workplace or whatever, there's an obvious hierarchy. There are whatever you're doing in the real world, yeah, you're right. It's not necessarily your parents, but there is absolutely still a hierarchy of people above and people below to be commanded. And, ideally in many of these kind of relationships, you still want there to be some type of like connection to one another, right? A professor should have respect for his students. A student should have respect for his professor, right? A boss ideally should have respect for the workers, as does the worker have, respect for the boss. Like, what is so complicated? What is now you're making the case. Now you're kind of like hinting at like socialist egalitarian utopia where everyone like there's no hierarchy. Imagine there's no heaven. It's true, but it's weird. This is all just very weird.
Individuals coming together voluntarily in a relationship where they value each other to this is the relationship between me and 50 strangers on the street. That is basically the critics of individualism are switching contexts in order to sell us on a real travesty of human relationships.
Now, that being said, there's no such.
But the family's not the only like hierarchy there is, like business employer, government to citizen. It's family's not the only. It's a good example because it's kind of a hierarchy, I guess we all universally respect or whatever. But like, it's not the only one there is. You don't turn once you turn 18, there's still a bunch of hierarchies to be obeyed and commanded, and there's still those types of relationships with other people. And so, and by the way, not everyone, you legally don't have to, but most people still kind of keep that level of a similar bond to their parents and to whatnot once they turn 18, once they become adults, so it's not like there's not precedent there for that not to also apply to society, you know? Which, I mean, it's very strange too, because aren't these the people that believe like that, you know, the whole phrase that like, you know, governments are formed by consent of the governed or whatever it is, you know, what is that? What is the consent of the governed, right? Is that not a bunch of like people who have to collectively come together and like agree to live under this thing, agree that by all collectively agreeing to live under this thing and kind of forming a social contract? Does that not imply sort of a relationship, a bond to one another? Like I don't know. I don't know. These are weird. These are weird people.
No such thing as the collective either. It's been tried before, fails every time because it defies the natural proclivities of human nature. My point is that there's actually a balance between individualism and collectivism that is necessary to live in a stable, free society. Because if you only focus on individualism like we've been doing for the last 100 years, then there's nothing left to unify people in the society. There's no language, there's no culture, no religion, no shared value framework. The only thing that we have in common is that we have nothing in common, but it's okay because we're all individuals.
It seems to me.
How can you disagree with that statement? Really? Is that I'm kind of curious what they have to say. Like I 100% agree. That's kind of a summary of what I talked about throughout the stream too. How can you like possibly disagree with that statement? I don't know. We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out from the Ayn Rand Center UK people. Okay.
To me right here that John Doyle's point is not that we're using collectivism to sacrifice people to a bigger group. It's essentially that we need a collectivism as some type of, you know, social fabric to hold everyone together, because if we don't, then we have independent interest groups, you know, popping up like BLM and stuff like that, and causing all these riots. So we need some type of common ground to hold us all together, and that seems what John Doyle means by collectivism.
Anytime somebody says we need a balance in moral issues, it means they haven't defined the alternatives right. And yeah, if you have a complete straw man that says individualism means living on an island and having no relationship to other people, and collectivism is you have relationships with other people, like I guess you know you need some sort of a balance. But if it's individualism is that each person is pursuing their own life and happiness and relating to others on voluntary terms, then what is a balance for that? A balance is compelling people to act against their own judgment, against their own happiness.
Voluntary terms, as he describes it, don't really exist. Like, you are made in the image of God and you are born into this world. Like, whether or not you choose to, I guess you could say voluntary in the sense that you can choose to defy them, but the consequences for defying them, you know, I would argue in this life and the next life are, you know, basically make it so it's not really voluntary, is it not? But you are born into this world with duties, right? Like, if you choose not to fulfill them, and if all of society choose not to fulfill them, things go wrong, right? Things really collapse. So, I mean, even like think of something like a government, like the fact that of government itself, this guy's philosophy itself, any governmental system will have to involuntarily impose its will on other people, whether that's a libertarian system or a communist system or an epic Vincedao is the Caesar system. Like, any of them are going to have to do that. And I don't understand the train of thought here. So, and it's like, society's not voluntary. That's not, I mean, it's really not voluntary. You know, you can leave, you can live in the woods, but it's like interacting within society, living under a government, that part isn't voluntary, right? And so if everyone did just act voluntarily, I guess that kind of is the Ancapistan view. That is like the Ayn Rand view. If you literally just gave everyone the total free will and the total free choice, everyone would live in peace and harmony. It's like, no, if you literally like this is like such a boomer common sense talking point. But if you literally just let people do whatever they want with kind of like no inherent or deeper responsibility, like, society will just kill each other. Oh, but that's a violation of the NAP. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen because that is kind of the state of human beings, right? And this is kind of the conservative view on human nature, is that humans are kind of like, you know, naturally sort of carnal, right? And so there's sort of like this way we have to live, and this is part of the reason. But really, I would argue it really comes from Christianity, and it's true. Too bad. Yes, it does. I'm going to thump my Bible on you and say that, you know, humans are fallen, right? We are in a fallen state. We're born into I don't know if we're born into a fallen state, but we exist in a fallen state, right? And of course, it is only through Jesus Christ that we can, escape that fallen state through the grace of the Father God. But I digress. Okay. Because we are, we're not like born sinning, but we are predisposed to sin to the point where all will fall short of the glory of God. True. And all will, eventually come to exist in a state of sin, until they are born again of the Spirit. Because of that, when you put humans together, they're not gonna live like heaven, some heavenly utopia or whatever, right? Humans are fallen creatures. We are fallen creatures, and so therefore, you just kind of leave us to our own devices. We will, destroy each other. We will destroy ourselves. In many ways, we already do. Like that's what kind of humanity does on a regular basis. We fight wars. We destroy each other. 4 centuries of liberal philosophy haven't changed this basic fact of human nature. I'd argue in some ways they've actually made it worse, but that's the way it is. So if you just tell society, okay, everyone's going to make voluntary associations with one another, and especially too, these are the same people say like religion is totalitarian. So let's have a fully atheist society where everyone just, it voluntarily does whatever to one another. Do you really think realistically that society is going to work? It's going to be this great thing where everyone gets along and sings Kumbaya? No. You will have a bunch of godless people left to their own devices, basically nothing to control them, nothing to hold them back. Yeah, they're voluntarily gonna, not even if they don't directly violate the non-aggression principle and start hurting each other, they're voluntarily going to do things that ultimately cause the implosion of society, right? Because societies grow great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will not sit in. That is true. And it's equally true that societies grow weak when people don't think like this. And that's literally exactly what's going to happen when you have a bunch of self-worshipping, selfish, as Ayn Rand puts it herself, selfish, self-worshipping, godless people all together voluntarily to do whatever they want. Yeah, because man is in a fallen state, because man is not God, because man comes nothing close to the glory of God. It's not exactly going to be a paradise, okay? It is not going to be the paradise city where the grass is green and the girls are pretty. I can verify that. Verifiably, demonstrably true.
Happiness against their own lives. What's the balance between those two things? It's true that a nation has to have unity, and the United States is the perfect picture of what a rational kind of unity among individuals is. That is, it's
really is it? Is the United States maybe he's going to say not the current United States, but you look at the country today, is it? Are we a prime example of what rational unity is? I see a lot of irrational disunity, if I were to be honest with you, and even if you want to go back to the founding fathers, part of that rational unity, was something of commonality. I mean, to an extent, it's also true that for the most part, early on in our country, states were left to themselves, but you even look within states, there is this common identity. There was a common practice of Christianity. Oh no, we can't have that. Okay, well, there was this kind of common sense of like English tradition in England. No, we can't have that either. A tradition is oppressive. So even when we did have unity in the United States, it's not really a prime example of, what they're saying, because it's a lie that we've just always been united by like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and maybe the Federalist Papers, nothing more, right? We've been united historically by cultural ideals, traditional ideals, Christian ideals, right? That's really what's been like the fabric that holds society together. Yes, our laws have been guided by things like the Constitution, but society, culture, right, has been held together more so by that, not by like the, John Locke or whatever. John Locke hasn't been holding America together all these years, Christianity has, American culture has, right? Christian tradition has. That's what's been holding it together. And by the way, a common bond we've been held together. Why? Because we have a bond to one another, because we view ourselves as having a duty to one another. That's what's been holding America together, not the other way around.
Shared belief in the rights of the individual. It's the shared belief that you have a right to live for the sake of your own happiness, and I have the right to live for the sake of my own happiness, and that will come together when our interests intersect, when we can build mutually fulfilling relationships together. And that's something.
Do our interests not intersect living together in a society, do not have mutual interest, living together in a society. Is that not a mutual, is a mutual, is saying, hey, I want the United States to be a prosperous, successful, happy country. Is that not a mutual interest? Apparently not. Mutual interest is only when you want to sell pornography and weed to one another. Okay, buddy.
Something that individualists do all the time, because guess what? Living in society is a huge benefit to an individual. We benefit in terms of the knowledge available to us, and we benefit in terms of trade, and certainly we benefit in terms of the personal relationships that we can build with people. But the precondition for that, the precondition for all
The precondition for that, I'll finish you, and the precondition for that is self-sacrifice, right? The precondition for that is, I don't believe in like the social contract in like the liberal sense, but there is such a thing as a social contract, right? Part of that is not just the fact that you have to be subject to laws, but I would also argue you have to basically still live in dominion to others, in sacrifice towards others, right? But anyways.
all of those to be positive and beneficial is precisely that we only enter into the kind of relationships that we judge as good for our lives. And so anybody who's saying, well, we need to balance individualism against collectivism, what they really mean is that I'm going to.
So you just made the case why. So basically what, okay. So what this guy is saying, you kind of catch it. What this guy is, so this guy admitted that like seeing yourself as having, this guy admitted that there is a mutual interest to living in a society, right? There's some type of like reason why, you ought to say, well, it's good for me to live in society because I get these benefits, whatnot. Like he said that, but then, right, he also said that just leave people alone. They'll choose that voluntarily. Really? Again, let me reiterate. If you have a bunch of immoral, selfish, self-worshipping, godless people in a society, and you basically leave them, just let them be, bro. Don't do anything. Are they going to basically just rationally decide, you know what, it's in our mutual interest to work together? Is that how, for the most part, selfish, self-worshipping, godless people in society act today? Right? Does your average like salt crystal worshiper weirdo, or even your average libertarian, are they like these upstanding citizens of society where they're always down to have a helping hand? If you're falling on hard times, you can fall back on me. Is it that, or is it usually like the Christian conservative traditionalist people who live their lives like that? It's like, dude, really, you serious? Like, no, actually, if you kind of just voluntarily let things be, people are not going to, just come together and mutually decide, well, I think I have a common, like not everyone, some people will, but there's going to be a pretty significant portion of the population that just decides, no, they're just going to be hedonists. They're just going to like act crazy. They're just going to do whatever the heck they want. That, even if that's like 30 to 40% of the population, without some degree of force to, stop that from happening, which is what you need in a society, which is what government does. If that 30 to 40% of society is going to make you exist in a constant perpetual state of civil war. Like, you see how that works? So anyways,
I'm going to tell you what to do with your life whenever I feel like it.
I don't think that, the only times in which two individuals intersect paths is when they're trading, values and getting a job and stuff like that. I think that we should always remain connected somehow through common values such as, religion and family. We shouldn't just interconnect because, a job opportunity. We should connect all the time and maintain that social fabric of, religious values and family values.
Those things I think are.
I still don't understand what the other dude is doing, that light skinned dude. Because am I the only one who's confused by that? Like, is he saying that, or is he like posing that as a question? Like, I don't really understand the relationship here. Maybe I wasn't paying attention earlier to when they explained that. But if he's saying that, I think he's gotten a lot better. I will say that, because I remember when he was on TikTok, just making, the constant libertarian inca videos all the time. But I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I think he's posing these as like things for this dude with the beard to respond to. I'm not sure though. I'm not really sure.
Are not values. Certainly, if we're talking about religious so-called values, and so the idea that like, well, these should predominate and like these should be the basis of society. I mean, first of all, they undermine freedom. I mean, religion by its very nature is antithetical to the kind of primary roots of freedom, which is a belief in the power of reason and a belief in the sanctity of the individual. What they're really saying is we're going to decide which religion or which religions are worthy, and we're going to impose that on all society.
Our religion is worthy. Our religion is correct.
Do you think
he just says it for me. It's so true. It's so true. Oh, bro, I'm enlightened, bro. Jesus died on the cross. Or I says, no, I'm enlightened, bro. That's all fake mythology, bro. I believe in reason. Yeah, you're coping. You're coping. Okay. This actually, as a matter of fact, fundamentally, this is Satanism. Okay. And I don't say that in like the whole satanic liberal Pelosi kind of sense. I mean that in like a serious sense. Satanism is often very misunderstood, but you ask a Satanist, right? Ask a Satanist. They'll tell you very often the response you'll hear is, I don't really worship Satan. I worship myself, right? That is the response you'll very often hear. And that's what Satanism most fundamentally is. It is not necessarily worship of Satan. It is worship of thyself. That is Satanism most fundamentally. And so, in that sense, yeah, liberalism, that's part of the reason like people can say like on a really philosophical sense, liberalism is satanic or objectivism is satanic because it is based on self-worship, right? Whereas conservatism is fundamentally, foundationally based on worship of God. Liberalism, objectivism, worship of thyself. That's where it's what it's based on. So that part is true. It's all a cope. It is one of the hardest cope. I believe in reason, bro. I'm a rational thinker. The nice thing about Christianity and the nice thing about the Bible is I think you can observe in the real world, in the natural world, a lot of kind of the word of God and the laws of God actually can just kind of play out for themselves. Obviously we know what happens in the next life, but even on this life, what does sin do to people? Sin is the punishment for death in kind of an afterlife sense, but the punishment of sin is death in the afterlife. But I also argue you can observe that like here as well. I mean, what happens to people when they engage in endless hedonism? What happens to people who engage in, what is defined as biblical immorality? What happens to those people? Are those people happy? Very often these people will be depressed. They'll have a lot of problems. Sometimes it'll even shorten their lifespans. And it's like, that's not by accident. Sin kills. With sin comes death, right? That's what it does, But I'm a rational thinker, bro. I'm a rational thinker. I think you just have a pursuit to happiness. You can observe the Bible be vindicated in real life, like all the time. I'm serious about that all the time. Sexual issues, cultural issues, personal issues, like in many ways you could, but no, I'm a rational thinker, bro. I reject that. So you know what? I'm gonna smoke a bunch of weed. I'm gonna have sex with a bunch of people. And it's gonna make me happy. And it's like, you kind of see what happens to those people, right? They turn out with a lot of problems. All right, a lot of problems. I think that there's a reason why leftists tend to be depressed at such high rates, right? And atheists and whatnot. Like there's a reason for this. Okay. You can observe the consequences and the prices of sin in the real world too. It's not just like a afterlife thing. You can definitely see it in this world too, And then that's why the first people, right? Adam and Eve lived like very long time, kind of the first people in Genesis. This is why they lived for like hundreds and hundreds of years, because, they weren't sinning in the way to the degree that like people are now, right? Sin causes death. It's true. And I think you can observe that. I think you can literally watch that happen to people, which is very sad. We don't celebrate it, but I think it's you'd be remiss to say that it's not constantly vindicated on a regular basis.
Religions are committed to imposing themselves. It almost seems like you just said all or most religions are committed to imposing themselves.
You have to keep in mind that what most of us know.
You know who else's religion is committed to imposing themselves? This guy right here. All right, this dude right here. I mean, he can claim it's not, but it is. Right? It absolutely is. By the way, as Christians, we're called to evangelize. Right? We're not really. Wars do happen. It's a kind of a reality of the way the world's going to go, but that's not really like the primary form we're called to convert people by, Jesus does say, like when his apostles want to strike down heretics, he says, you know, you do not understand what is in your heart, right? You have something carnal in your heart. Don't do that, So it's important to point out. But this dude's religion is a self-imposed. Any religion, any really belief system is going to be self-imposing in some way. People can cope and say, actually, mine is different because mine is just objectively true. That's true. Mine is different because mine is objectively true. I can play that game too, and I won't play that game because it's true.
Know in our day-to-day lives as religion is neutered religion. It was neutered by the Enlightenment, and religion basically had to make terms with Enlightenment values of valuing life on earth, valuing the human mind. And so most religious people, and the way that religion
You're right. Screw your Enlightenment. If you want to consider Edmund Burke the Enlightenment, he did a good job, but he defended Christianity. He defended the God's natural order. But you're right. Screw your Enlightenment. I'm really not a big fan of the Enlightenment. I'm not. It's, the vast majority of the philosophers who came out of the Enlightenment suck. Burke is an exception. Maybe a few others I can't think of are an exception. But that's precisely because they were like the conservative philosophers, but they're not the ones that connotated with the Enlightenment, are they? The Enlightenment is most known for the liberal thinkers, the guys, this type of guys this guy follows, and it's true. No, I'm not a fan of the Enlightenment.
Is in the culture today. It's not necessarily of the same sort of crusading totalitarian form that we see in, for instance, many parts of Islam today. Religion in and of itself is inherently totalitarian because it's saying these are the most important values, and you can't question them. They're to be accepted as dogma on faith.
Correct.
The laws of God are to be obeyed. And if that's your outlook, then there's no rational, or there's no kind of logical opposition to enforcing them. And that's why historically, when religion has set the terms and secular life had to bow to it, then it was always anti-freedom and antithetical to people's ability to live their own lives.
Oh, really? Okay, let's take a look then. Who sets the terms now? Who sets the terms now in America? It's not the church. Christians, at least traditional Christians, hold a vast minority of the political and governmental power in America. America today is ruled by a secular religion of globalism, whatever you want to call it. But America today is ruled by secularism. Is America suddenly a beacon of freedom? Is any communist country, any experiment with communism or socialism, which are godless ideologies, right? Marx was openly anti-Christianity. And it's not even just that he didn't personally like Christianity. His whole philosophy is based on the rejection of religion. Most fundamentally, it's a godless rejection of God, right? Where are they suddenly so free? Even look at a country like China. Everyone is like, China's so bad. China's so bad. State atheism is the religion of China. Is it exactly like a beacon of freedom here, folks? In fact, if you want to talk, I guess the best libertarian society seems to be like the original United States or whatever. I mean, what was kind of the moral majority in the original historical United States? It was the Protestant Christians. It was. But no. We don't want that part. We just want the freedom part. What was keeping that freedom together? What was kind of holding that freedom up? Was it just up on itself? No. It was a Christian moral majority that was still kind of held the power in that country. And they exerted it too. Let's be clear about that. You look at blasphemy laws, sodomy laws, marriage laws across states in the country. You look at the fact that every president has sworn their hand on the Bible. Sworn in with their hand on the Bible, right? They have the like traditional, I guess, Christian majority in America absolutely has, absolutely used to at least, it kind of exert its dominance. They don't really believe in something that exists, And every time we let secularism run anything, it is a disaster. Whether that's the Soviet Union or modern China or the modern United States, or Canada or England or Germany or whatever. Every time we experiment with that, it's an unmitigated disaster. But you know, the problem is these overpressing Christians, bro. No. Also, it is for freedom. It is for freedom that Christ set us free. Also true. You know what sets us free? The truth sets us free. So true. But
lives on earth.
It seems like you're being like, you know, ahistorical here because, you know, it is American values such as, you know, family and religious type of practices that has kept America together and stuff like that.
correct.
And as we see that America progressed away from those values,
Correct.
and see, you know, things like, you know, BLM and all these riots going
Right,
on and
exactly.
separating America. So are you saying that you're against, you know, American values that's held America together for a very long time?
Yes, he is. Yes, he doesn't even believe in America or like nations in general. He doesn't believe in nations. He doesn't really believe in countries or, you know, societies really in kind of any type of like paternally connected sense. He doesn't. So the answer is yes. I'll answer that for him. The answer is yes. You know, he doesn't believe in America, nor does he really believe in nations or countries in general, right? He just believes in a bunch of individuals. He does. So the answer is yes.
What's ahistoric is the idea that like this 1950 saccharine, like family, this and that was the American values. Go actually read stuff from the period of the founding. It was an enthusiasm about, they were not talking about these mealy mouth, let's all sit down to dinner and do it. Like that is so far from what interested them. Like they were concerned with.
Let me ask you a question. Do you know what states were like the biggest supporters of the American Revolution? Do you know which states and, you know, the original colonies, I should say, what colony did the revolution start in? What colony kind of was the moral spiritual driver of the revolution? Any historical accuracy knows that, guess what? It was Massachusetts. What was Massachusetts? Massachusetts was the most austere, most strict state of the country, and I mean, I should say colony in you know of the English colonies at the time, right? And who lived there? The Puritans, okay? And so if you think, let me just say this, if you think the 50s were bad in terms of like moral policing or family values or whatever, wait until you learn how, you know, we talk about the Pilgrims were, but really the majority of Massachusetts were the Puritans. Wait till you find out how the Puritans were. And guess what else? The Puritans were really like the backbone of the American Revolution. That's why the American Revolution happened, okay? So let me make that first and foremost clear. And let's also take a look at just the way things were during the American Revolution. You know, Christianity, Christ was at the center of colonial and American life in general, right? And yeah, but Federalist 19 doesn't mention God anywhere. That's yes, but how did people live back then? Right? How did people live in Massachusetts? How did people live generally in these places in general? Very religious. Okay, and that's a fact. That is a fact, especially New England, by the way, which again, these were the most revolutionary states at the time, especially New England. Christ was at the center of life, right? You know, part of the reason why the founders don't mention religion a lot in like the Federalist Papers or whatever is because of the fact that it was just so basically commonly accepted to be this part of American life. Like everyone just did it. Everyone just went along with it. That, you know, they didn't really view there to be the need for like that type of discussion. It's just like, you know, the vast majority of people went to church. That's the way it was. You know, Massachusetts was all these Puritans, right? Like that's just the way things were. So nobody ever really felt the need to like inscribe that down at the time. You could say endowed by our creator or whatever, but nobody really felt the need to like go into detail about that because that's just the way things were. That is, as a matter of fact, a moral and religious society is the only society in which the founders have the context within to like write up the Constitution and write up these ideas. So you're just wrong. But bro, did you read the Constitution doesn't mention God anywhere, bro? Therefore, God had no place in like traditional American life. Give me a break. What kind of logic even is that? Oh, but a lot of the founding fathers were deists. Therefore, you know, it had no. What was American society like at the time? You know, I wish we had a time machine. I want you to go back in time to Massachusetts in 1780, 5, let's say, and tell me that this is a totally secular society where everyone supports freedom of religion. No. What did they do to heretics in Massachusetts? What did they do to them? I think they just respected their NAP, bro. What did they do to sodomites in revolutionary colonial Massachusetts? What did they do to the people they viewed as sinners or heretics or blasphemers or whatever? Did they just say, well, honestly, I mean, I'm going to be a reasonable, rational person, bro? That's not how it went. That's not what happened. Okay. So you can't any appeal to traditional American values. You want to talk, the 1950s were so bad or whatever. 1950s were not actually, as a matter of fact, the 1750s or 1850s, 1790s or whatever, they were actually stricter than the 50s in many ways. I hope people know that. I hope people know that. So
the kind of individuals like Newton, who were discovering new knowledge.
Newton. Okay, wasn't Isaac Newton a Christian? I actually let me see. Was Isaac Newton Christian? I thought he was. Let me see here. If my phone will load. If we're not gonna just have 119 here on stream, folks. Okay, can someone look at this? Look at this. Look at this. It's just. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if I can show my screen because I was shopping for something and I think it shows my zip code on here, but it's not loading. Okay, whatever. Isaac Newton. The chat is saying the answer is yes. Okay, so it's like Isaac Newton, bro, Isaac Newton was a Christian, bro. Yeah, exactly. I knew it. See, I was right. I knew that. Isaac Newton was out here. Isaac Newton was Christian. Okay, and Isaac Newton lived in a heavily religious society. What are you people talking about? And exactly, the engine textbook is absolutely right. All states in the U.S. actually had sodomy laws until 1961, showing the U.S. is a traditionally religious and moral country. Yeah, exactly. No, bro, but actually the Federalist doesn't mention that. Therefore, that didn't exist. Okay, buddy.
And people like Benjamin Franklin, who were pushing the frontiers of science forward, they were concerned with individuals actually going out there and accomplishing something, and it was the real value was on that. It was on the mind, and it was on how do we create a society where people can use their mind and live lives. Isaac
Newton was a Christian. What are you talking about? And yeah, there are other examples. Isaac Newton was a Christian. Isaac Newton's biggest, maybe he's most known for like what he did with the mind, but his biggest, his biggest goal in life, his biggest emphasis in life was not on like exploring knowledge and finding the mind, assuming he was a devout Christian and, genuinely in his heart. His biggest, goal in life is to glorify God, to live for God, to come to Christ, right? That was the main priority of his life. What a terrible example. What an awful example. No, Isaac Newton was just a hippie who wanted to expand his mind, bro. Okay.
Lives that are filled with achievement and joy. If you think about our problems today, it's precisely, I think, the extent to which we've abandoned that focus on the individual human mind and what it can achieve and an individual's ability to thrive and prosper, that we've gotten these problems. Because, what is the kind of cancel culture debates and BLM and all of this, except for people ganging up into little tribes and fighting each other instead of viewing others as individuals? It's the American values of the founding, not the...
What? Yeah, you're right to an extent. It is tribalism. But tribalism exists in any culture where people don't have any type of prevailing like common interest or common unity. And you're the one out here saying, reject Christianity, reject American tradition, reject American culture. And then you're like, well, all this tribalism is really just happening. All this cancel culture and divided society is just happening because people won't think rationally with their minds, bro. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. Like that's kind of actually self-contradicting, is it not? He's trying to reject anything that used to bring America unity, But, you know, now it's like, but actually, you know, we all now look at how society's tribalizing now that we have no unified purpose or principles. What do you think happens when societies don't have unified purposes or principles? Nonsense.
The kind of American values of the Eisenhower era, which somehow get glowed up into little tribes and fighting each other instead of viewing others as individuals. It's the American values of the founding, not the kind of American values of the Eisenhower era, which somehow get glorified because I can remember my great-grandfather seemed pretty happy or something like that.
If you
this guy would have an interesting experience if he went back to the founding, right? Not just like sat in the Constitutional Convention or whatever, but really went back to like society and the founding. Really, you think that was like, do you think that was less religious? You think that was kind of less regulating of morality than the 1950s were? Absolutely not. The exact, like the total polar opposite of that, dude. The total opposite of that. You know, go to Puritan Massachusetts. Tell me that's some like paradise of libertarian freedom. No, it wasn't. It was, I mean, it was basically a theocracy. It was. Actually, I think Massachusetts at least used to have an official state church, did they not? But even like, you know, the less religious colonies, you still would have gotten this. You still would have seen a lot of religious people. You still would have seen regulations in morality. Okay. The sodomy laws in every single state, you know, are one example of this, you know, but laws in general, in terms of regulating social morality, were all basically universally much harsher back then than they were, obviously, than they were now, but also even like the 1950s, you know, and that's not me being anti-1950s. I am a fan of the 50s. I think the 50s were a very good decade. I think there's a lot we ought to restore from them. But it's like, you know, if you want to go back to the founding, you're only going to get something actually that's kind of even more traditional and more like austere and more kind of moral majority religiously motivated than the 1950s were, you know. Wait till this guy sees the appeal to heaven flag. Like, is that just not a thing? You know, did we not fight an entire war with a flag that literally says an appeal to heaven? You know, I guess not. I guess not. Let's just finish out here.
If you enjoyed this episode of Method and Madness, go ahead and make sure to click the
I did not enjoy it.
bell icon down below so you don't miss an
No, I
episode
will
every
not.
single Monday. Additionally, if you like the content
Why
that
is it
Ayn Rand
zoomed in on
Institute
his face?
provides, then you should consider becoming a member by clicking the link in the description down below.
No, become a member to my channel by clicking the link in my description down below. Oh, look, we have a Carter Shaw is live. Very interesting. And we have, is this Elijah? And then we have Jack Murphy. Oh, this is a very good video, guys. You guys should watch this. We have Capitalism and Socialism, Crash Course History. I do not want to watch that. But yeah, guys. So, like I said, let me reiterate one central point, okay? The point I made earlier, that Ayn Rand should have no place in our tent, all right? The Ayn Rand Institute does not belong in CPAC or SAS or anywhere else. Like it's both heretical from a religious standpoint, and it's just basically the opposite of conservative from an ideological, political, and philosophical standpoint, okay? And like I said, let me reiterate this last point here. Conservatives should view Ayn Rand vilify Ayn Rand in the same light they do people like Karl Marx and whatever else, you know? They should. I don't know if they will, but they should. So that's what I'll say about it. Okay. Anyways, guys, we're not going anywhere. We're not ending the stream. Okay. But if you're watching on the live stream right now, if you're watching this live, don't go anywhere. We'll do Q&A. We'll have fun. But if you're watching on the replay, I'm gonna cut it off right here. We'll do the Q&A, and then on the replay, it'll be up for the members. So to watch our ensuing Q&A, if you're watching this on the replay, be sure to become a member. Link in the description, or you can join the member tab, I think, on the sidebar of the channel. But if not, have a very good night. Be sure to subscribe, okay? Be sure to subscribe to this channel, especially if you are a Doyle head who has come from this channel. We love to see it. All right, I appreciate it very much. But thank you very much for watching. Alpha Muzoni, God bless. Not Ayn Rand bless. Not even Isaac Newton bless, even though he wouldn't have wanted that. Okay, not reason or ration. God bless, and have a good night. Peace.
In leaving it, I do so with this prayer. May God's grace be with you in all the days ahead.
He is a globalist, and we are nationalists. He believes in some Pax Universalis. We believe in the old republic. He would put America's wealth and power at the service of some vague new world order. We will put America first. So today we call for a new patriotism, where Americans begin to put the needs of Americans first. For a new nationalism, where in every negotiation, be it arms control or trade, the American side seeks advantage and victory for the United States. And the people of this country need to recapture our capital city of Washington from lobbyists and registered agents of foreign powers who are hired to look out for everybody and everything except the national interest of the United States. And our Western heritage is going to be handed down to future generations and not dumped onto some landfill called multiculturalism.